Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to talk about the delicate footwork needed from Labour and the Conservatives over this week's controversial budget, as some seem to think we have a baffling situation whereby Labour are positioning themselves to the right of the Conservatives when it comes to taxing business. However, this isn't actually the case. The Conservatives are just in a mess and are trying to enact some sort of fiddle before the next election, that's all. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So in last week's PMQs, I talked about how it was a very surreal situation that we had where the Labour leader was calling for taxes not to be increased for businesses, and a Conservative Prime Minister was refusing to give such an assurance. Because it seems weird for most people. Most people think of Conservatives being capitalists as lowering taxes, and if you actually get any tax revenue after your business-friendly approach, you might spend a few quid on public services, but if you don't have enough, then you cut the services, you don't raise the taxes. Whereby that same general view of Labour being socialists is that they tax the hell out of as many people as they can in order to fund their limitless vision for a large national public services portfolio. This is essentially what I thought of the two as a kid, before I became interested enough in politics to find things out for myself. This is because, like most people, I got my political information from people who never studied the topics of their discussions. They got it from the media, and who is it that supplies the media? Largely the Conservatives. People don't like studying politics or economics. Actually, most people don't like studying anything. Studying takes time, takes effort, and it is, above all, for most people, boring. But socialist economics adopts many of the idea of Keynesian economics. Sure, Keynes himself was not a socialist, anything but. However, he understood that unchecked capitalism leads to a very bad situation. So his economics was based on rules and regulations, constraining capitalism. Just the sort of rules and regulations that socialists would welcome in a society that had to adopt capitalism in some form. If it must exist, let it exist with tightly controlled parameters. And one of the key aspects of this economics is that you borrow in tough times and you pay back in good times. That's how Labour operates. We can see the example applied more clearly in countries that have an almost permanent state of social democracy in their governance. So Starmer calling for no rises in, say, corporation tax confuses a lot of the masses who just think that tax on businesses must always be increased, but it's also the right call. I don't say that as an expert economist because I'm not one, but one who has read from independent expert economists. You will do well to find one calling for corporation tax, for example, to increase this year, even amongst those who argue for it to be increased once the emergency is over. And the reason is simple enough. Businesses protect their profits and businesses employ people. And this isn't about some trickle-down theory nonsense. We know that's rubbish. Businesses answer to their shareholders. Sure, good companies also want to keep morale up amongst their workforce, and you don't do that by dumping extra work on them because you've sacked a load of their colleagues. But their top priority is shareholders. Profit is king in most private businesses. So what happens if you put pressure on those profits? Well, it depends. In good times, nothing, because the profits are still good. Corporation tax is too low under the Conservatives. They have spent a decade cutting it down to embarrassing levels. It absolutely needs increasing back to the levels when Labour were last in power, at least. But if you do it when businesses are squeezed and the outlook is not hopeful, due to either Brexit or COVID, or both, then increasing taxes actually just translates into job losses. Right now, as a result of the pandemic, companies are finding very efficient ways of working. This is good in many ways. Necessity being the mother of invention and all that. But more efficient ways of working always inevitably means identifying that large companies in particular can probably do without a few of their workers. Now, this doesn't automatically mean job losses. After all, if profits are good, then you don't need to mess about. But if you squeeze those profits, the shareholders start asking a lot of awkward questions. And it's easier to let some staff go than piss off the shareholders and investment bankers. Frankly, if Starmer called for tax increases right now, he'd be sacrificing economic credibility. He's trying to persuade people that Labour is going to be fiscally responsible. He needs to show that the Conservatives are fiscally irresponsible. Now, this is no mean feat. I remember before the 2019 general election, The serious papers, the serious Conservative backing papers, looked at Boris Johnson's budget plans and said that this isn't feasible, even the Financial Times. But did they absolutely slate it? No, they didn't. It was muted. It was a bit like, it's a bit, you might, it's not really going to work, is it? Whereas if Labour did something like that, it would be all over. They'd be explaining to people that this would mean economic ruin. Now, that doesn't mean that Starmer's committing to keeping corporation tax low come the general election. This isn't a general policy. He won't. He said so clearly. He said that corporation tax is too low. He said that it will need to increase. But this year, during the emergency, no. Because that is a position purely for the here and now, and he's said that. But in order to satisfy people that he's thinking about economic policy and not just a reactionary who will just always, as a default situation, increase taxes year on year, without ever considering the need, he has to show that his policy is based on the present situation. So he will say that it shouldn't be raised now, which is what he has done, in line with the vast majority of independent economists. But he will also call for it to be raised as we get back to whatever normal Brexit and coronavirus allows again, because, you know, independent economists will also be advising that. The bottom line is that what's needed now is spending. This is in line with what Labour want, and it's what economists are calling for. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you can't spend what you don't have. We're a wealthy nation who prints our own money. The nation's finances don't work like our own household finances. But it is a surreal situation because the Conservatives look like increasing taxes significantly as well. Of course, nobody in government is saying much about the budget, although the Chancellor dropped a few hints yesterday, which is a little bit naughty, he's not supposed to. So we do have to wait for the details this Wednesday, but reports are emerging that Boris Johnson is threatening to remove the whip from any Conservative MP who votes against the budget this week. Now, don't get me wrong, MPs are expected to vote with their party on the budget. They're supposed to vote with their party on most things, actually, but it's understood that individual circumstances can allow for a few MPs to have to vote against their own party every now and then, depending on, you know, local situation. But you're supposed to support the budget because without the budget, you have no spending plans at all. This isn't like America, where it seems to be fairly common for legislators to bring the country to a standstill by refusing to vote through budgets. But if you don't usually get threats of removing the whip, this would suggest that the budget that Rishi Sunak is going to announce this week is going to be deeply unpopular with the Conservative Party. Because the only time you ever threaten to remove the whip ahead of a vote is if you think it can make a material difference to the result. Basically, if it's true that this threat has been issued, then the government are worried that without it, their budget could fail. This would be deeply embarrassing. You know, governments do sometimes lose votes, but not the two votes they must never lose are confidence votes, of course, and budgets. And should that happen, talk would inevitably move to talk of a confidence motion in Boris Johnson's leadership itself. And what would piss off that number of Conservative MPs? Why is this threat needed? Either tax rises or curtailing spending promises. Because the Conservatives are in a mess. They are now reliant on a large number of MPs in both the north and the south of England. But they want very different things, in fact, mutually exclusive things. The ones in the south don't want tax rises, because they do all right. That's where the wealth of the country is, it's where the bulk of the population is, sure, but it's where a disproportionate amount of the wealth is. But the ones in the north don't want spending cuts. The only way to satisfy both is to increase spending and leave taxes alone. But that means much heavier borrowing. But we've already borrowed very heavily for the coronavirus emergency, and that's still continuing, albeit not biting as badly as last year. We've also got Brexit in the mix, knackering our tax revenues as well. Sunak wants to raise taxes. He's wanted to do so for a while. He is a Northern MP. It looks very much like he's going to, and presumably on a scale that could easily invite a large-scale rebellion that, with opposition voting against it, would sink the budget and possibly Johnson's leadership. So we have this, what appears to be a mad situation, where the Labour leadership is arguing for no tax rises and the Conservative leadership is arguing for tax rises. But both have good reason to do so within their own political agenda, and both are setting themselves up against some of their own support base by doing so. Now, the argument for the Conservatives, because I've explained with Labour, it actually makes economic sense, and they have to be the party of economic sense in order to win the next election. But what about the Conservatives then? I mean, if it makes economic sense not to raise taxes, well, why are the Conservatives doing it? They're doing it now so that they can pull their usual trick of lowering them just before the next election. Now, this was put to the Chancellor yesterday, and he denied knowing anything about this tactic. Well, where's this come from? I'll tell you where it's come from. There was a report about 6 months ago in the Times reporting that the Chancellor had told Boris Johnson, we need to raise taxes early in this Parliament so that we can lower them towards the end and con people into voting for us at the next election. Very messy. And this is why I say there's going to be some nifty footwork needed from both leaderships on this. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.